Hey, Earthlings! Welcome, welcome, welcome. So,
hello.
Is it too late to say Happy New Year or what? I don't know the convention, so I'll do it anyway.
I think we can say it.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah.
Happy rebirth of the sun. Some people say.
Oh, do they? Yeah. Okay.
They do.
Right.
Apparently.
Right. Okay. A little bit of housekeeping. Usual thing before we get going. This is streaming to 3 different places, as we know. So, in terms of the interaction, the best place for the interactive chat is my YouTube channel. So if you're watching on Facebook, if you do comment, we will see it. It's just that you won't see any of the other people commenting back, as it were. So there's that. And then, of course, in relation to things like super chats and all that, well, we basically don't do them. We don't believe in them. So we will never charge you to have your comments put on the screen. So don't worry about that in case you're fretting back there, wherever you are in the world. So there's that as well. So yeah. So let's do a couple of intros. I think Terry was here first. So hi, Terry. So yeah, Terry was here.
Oh, well done, Terry. Well done.
Yeah. Calling all vegans. All right, that's a new. Is that a new one, Wendy? Calling all vegans.
Oh, I don't recognise calling all vegans, but welcome.
Oh, there you go.
Top tier human earthlings.
Yeah. Caroline Harris from Always Rama Rights podcast. Hello.
Hey, Caroline. Good to see you.
Jeremy the 8th. Philip from Wendy.
New York. Is that getting worse and worse?
I know.
I do hope so.
It is a little bit. Okay, and then we've got Jennifer coming in and Anne Griffin. So people,
Jenny McQueen says hello as well. Jenny McQueen says Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome, Jenny.
The west coast of Canada. All right, you haven't been bought and sold yet, then. That's good. So, so people, as you can see, we have 2 special guest panelists for today, Jane Holgate and John Page. Now, I used to know these 2 back in the Stone Age. It seemed like a long time ago. You know, it was Manchester mainly, but we were talking about when we first met, John. You thought it might be London. I thought it might be Liverpool, but we certainly met up in Manchester. I know that. So. Right, and I was saying before we came on the air, we normally have an icebreaker in this show in the form of a short news item, but we're gonna forgo that today. But we do still have an icebreaker. Have a look at this. So this is Jane breaking the ice on her own pond. And you've been doing this for years, is that right, Jane?
For about 15 years, yeah.
Great this week.
I haven't come to any harm yet.
No. But what about that thing about, if you're supposed to fall off a ferry, you've got 4 minutes. So you have a time limit. I mean,
yeah, we do. I mean, the water this morning was just, I think it was about 1.4 degrees. So I think we only stayed in for about 3 minutes this morning. So anything longer than that, you're liable to get hypothermia. So we try and avoid that.
Yeah, well, that's good. And John, do you do this as well?
I have been known to.
Okay. Did you this morning, if you're going to be difficult?
Yeah, I do it every morning.
Oh, you do? Well.
Occasionally we have these discussions where Jane will say, do you really want to do this morning? I say, I never really want to do it any morning, but I still get persuaded that it's good for me.
Yeah, Wim Hof would be proud, definitely. Do you feel like it's really helped your health as well? Like, generally, you feel like your immune system is boosted? And
yeah, I think so. I mean, we tend not to get colds or viruses or things like that, and we've still managed to avoid COVID up till now. So maybe it does. I don't know. It seems to work.
Yeah. But it's invigorating, is it?
It is, but it's also cold.
Yeah, it's so hardcore. When you saw you doing that, I was very impressed.
Polar bear bath from Deb, and they'll be scraping me off the bottom of the pond. Yeah, well, I wouldn't be getting in, I'll tell you that. It's, even when I go into the sea, it's kind of getting past the waist area, if you get my drift, that's the area. So I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure how I could do that. I mean, I was very impressed, Jane, that you just kind of went in, you know, obviously used to it. So
yeah, I think you do get used to it after a time. But I mean, there's always that first initial shock, but it's never like when when you first start. You just get used to it.
And then do you feel great when you come out?
Frozen.
Oh, okay. I was about to say, yeah, you're invigorated, you're ready to go, you're going to take on the day.
You do feel really good, you feel really alive. And it's, I mean, people always talk about it being great for mental health, because you can't think of anything else when you're in there apart from the cold. So, no, it does. I think it does really lift you, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Just to say, it's not freezing all year round.
It's not far off.
But pretty fresh. Just to because Jeremy said that their pond over at the sanctuary in Georgia is frozen, not a common occurrence apparently, but fortunately the fishes stay nice and low and warm. And actually someone was saying to me the other day, and I meant to look this up and then didn't, so I just wondered if anyone else has knowledge on this, but someone was saying if there are fishes in a pond that freezes, you're not actually supposed to break the ice. Is that true? Have you heard of this?
Don't know.
I don't know if Jeremy knows of anything about this. No one knows. But I will look that up actually, because I have some fishes here in a pond as well, and they've been frozen. They've been actually kind of just so still like statues. It's really worrying to watch them, but I think that's naturally a state that they get into when the water freezes.
Yeah, we don't have any fish in our pond, so.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Because you dug it yourself, didn't you?
Well, not personally, but a local farmer did it for us.
Oh, yeah. Did you have to get planning permission and all that?
No, I didn't. No.
Or at least that's your story. Right. So now you've both really been thinking about social movements, thinking about social movement strategy, thinking about social movement organizations, all this kind of stuff, and also actually being active in social movements since the 80s. So do you want to give us just a couple of sentences to introduce yourself for everybody, please?
Go on, John, you go first.
Okay. I became active in the East London Hunt Saboteurs in the late 70s. I became involved in what was known as Coordinated Animal Welfare, which was an insurgent group that was concerned about policies of existing welfare organisations. I went on to work at the BUAV as their group student coordinator, and later worked with Jane at Animal Aid in their group coordination. After moving on from the animal rights movement, I worked at the Equality Trust, I've worked at Runnymede Trust, Hope Not Hate, and for various trade unions. So I've had experience of coalface organising in a significant range of contexts.
And my background is that I got involved in the anti-nuclear movement when I was about 15, 16. And then I went to university where I became a member of Friends of the Earth. And soon after that, joined the Hunt Saboteurs in Manchester. And that would have been about 1980, early 80s. Involved in anti-fur campaigns in Manchester, and then moved to London and got more involved in the trade union movement. And since then, I've had all sorts of different jobs, but involved in lots of different campaigns in different organisations, whether they're community-based or trade union-based. And then I studied for my PhD, and I'm now a professor of work and employment relations at the University of Leeds. And all my research has been about organising, whether that be in the trade union movement or in community organising. Yeah.
Well, we've been going through your book the last week or so, and thank you so much for giving us I think it's a draft copy I think we got, so thanks very much for that. It was a little bit like a trip down memory lane for me, which was quite interesting. Like, for example, mentioning groups like Chickens Live. I mean, who remembers Chickens Live? You know that kind of. That was Claire Druce, I think, wasn't it? Yeah. So,
absolutely.
yeah, but it goes to show how things change a little bit, because in those days, vegans were campaigning for supermarkets to stock free-range eggs, right? Which, of course, we wouldn't be doing now. So it's kind of interesting the way that things have changed. Would you describe, because it's a controversial issue now, and I'm sure it is not just in the the animal movement, but would you describe your position as intersectional, or is that a word you tend to swerve? Or
I would never swerve that word, and I would be very interested in having a discussion with someone who chose to. I mean, I've done work in the anti-racist movement, and a number of people in black organisations have said to me they really don't like intersectionality because they think it dilutes their issue. And that's a very interesting subject to have. But I think if you read the book, intersectionality runs all the way through. But Jane, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I've in my academic work, I've written about intersectionality in relation to the research that I've done, particularly around migrant workers and trade unions. So issues of race, sex, gender, all those different aspects of people's identity are all important when it comes to campaigning from my perspective. So it's something that I think is really important.
And what's really interesting in the book, actually, the thing that I really noticed and really loved about it is all the examples of campaigns that basically bring together diverse communities and lots of coalitions of different, organisations that come together to campaign over maybe one issue or one threat that affects them all, but in different ways, and then also solidarity from one group for another, not necessarily because it affects them, but just because they show solidarity. And I just loved all of that as well in the book. I just wanted to ask you both, actually, what was it that because in a moment you're going to give us a presentation basically as an overview of the book. What made you want to put this book together in the first place? What was the driver behind that?
I would say that there comes a time when you get to realise you're having the same arguments, same debates with people that you're having 40 years previously. And sometimes creating the opportunity to write down and bring together the experience you've had provides an opportunity for other people to short circuit. I mean, we made loads of mistakes. If we'd written a book about all the mistakes we'd made, it would be a very long book. And so the idea that you sort of try and share what knowledge you have gained with other people, because certainly me and Jane have both gained enormously from reading from other organisers or working with other organisers. And I think it's just tough for people when they start just thinking, where do I start? There needs to be as much commitment to thinking about campaigning as there is actually doing the campaigning. And we just thought we could stimulate some thinking.
And I think one of the other things is lots of the books around organising tend to be very subject specific. So you'll find them on trade unions, you will find them on community campaigning, but there's very few books where there's a crossover. And I think both of us thought, well, actually, a lot of the theory around organising is the same, whichever social movement that you're involved in. And it's actually interesting to look at it from very different perspectives, which is why we thought writing about all the different campaigns we've been involved in over time would actually be really useful to a wider range of people.
Yeah, brilliant. And a question from Deb, is their book available now?
It is. I think it's out in a couple of days' time, but if you go to the Bristol University Press website, you can find the book there, but I think it's available on the 16th, I think they said.
Formally, it gets published tomorrow, so but they're already sending them out.
Yeah.
Right. So the Bristol University Press website is the best place.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you just Google it, it will come up from their website. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your position? This is very tricky, isn't it, for authors and stuff, about things like Amazon and stuff, because yeah, I know
there's not a lot we can do about it, to be honest. If people choose to buy it from that platform, then there's nothing we can do about it, really. But it's better to buy it from independent booksellers or directly from the bookseller.
Yeah, I would say that. And before we go on, I just want to explain what's going on with Nella. She's actually at a vet clinic right now. I think, volunteering, but also, working away. And so that explains why the screen sometimes goes blank. So Ella is here. She's listening. And
She's somewhere, yeah.
Yeah.
She's actually training. She's doing, she does all the search and rescue work that following the fires and the floods in Greece. So she's actually doing some kind of training for a qualification for so-called wildlife search and rescue, and to be able to help those individuals in need. So this is part of her work experience. So she's been there quite a lot over the last few weeks, doing good work. Nella,
needed in California now, is it California where it's all gone up? So well, the first question I wanted to ask, because I'm really interested in the history of social movements and social movements in general. I mean, just reading about social movements is really interesting in the first place, civil rights and everything else. I always get the impression that a lot of people in the modern movement, and obviously I'm thinking about the animal movement perhaps, is they don't seem to know how to join a movement, if that makes sense. In other words, we're getting a lot of people coming in to the movement, and instead of learning about the movement they've joined, they're trying to reshape it to fit their values. I mean, is that something that happens with movements in general?
Not thought about that before. I mean, is that something you think's changed over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, or is something you think that's been going for a while? I'm just wondering whether more online platforms and way of contacting people lends itself to that than face-to-face organising.
Yeah. Well,
I think, Roger, with the animal rights movement, I'm not an expert on the animal rights movement anymore, but I think there's probably what you would describe as the vegan movement, and then there's the plant-based diet. And I think people probably confuse the two. Somebody say, "Oh, I've gone vegan," meaning that they have adopted a plant-based diet, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a step in the right direction. But whether or not they understand the philosophy of the vegan movement is a different matter. And on top of that, I think there's just been a drift in politics, certainly over the last 40 years, to individualizing things rather than collectivizing. So people think, well, I'm a vegan, I think this, therefore this is what the vegan movement means. And I think that comes to that sort of people's sense of centering themselves rather than centering the movement.
Yeah, well,
and also I think that's really, I really resonate with what you just said there, John. And also I think there's an element of individuals pedestaling and platforming other people as kind of leaders, or people doing the most of the campaigning, or online campaigning anyway, and advocacy, but then feeling disempowered themselves. So it's like, oh, I donate to this person through Patreon, through the chat, super chats, all that kind of thing, and this person is out there doing great activism, and therefore my contribution helps them, but therefore I'm disempowering myself because I don't feel able to get involved in some way. So it kind of almost brings us away from that community feel, doesn't it, that you talk so much about in the book.
Yeah, I mean, Linda makes a good point that, she's talking about working in a trade union, and there being face-to-face meetings. And I think, once people are in the room together and they understand, the trade union has got a constitution, a way of working, a set of rules, they understand what they've joined and what they belong to. And I think that makes a difference. But I think when we're online and people are not actually meeting each other face-to-face, I think it's very different then. Yeah,
I think there's something in that. And what Colleen said is really interesting. In fact, our next guest, Benny Malone, has just got his second book coming out. And he was saying that a lot of people push back about the very idea that they're in a movement. They don't recognize that they're in a movement. And so in terms of your writing, Jane and John, I mean, that must be something to do with neoliberalism and all that you were talking about, no such thing as society. So are you seeing that kind of sentiment in other movements?
Can I just pick up on what Wendy said about that whole thing about people giving money for somebody else to do activism?
Yeah.
I think that giving away our agency is a huge problem. And I think that the first chapter of the book, we call it the 2 souls of organising. And, you know, that it's really important that people understand we will not win unless all of those people who share our concerns use their agency to push for change. It's no good being a spectator cheerleading on some other super activist. That's not going to help anyone. But in terms of the issue, I think there's a particular issue. There's a battle for the soul of the animal rights movement. I think perhaps in a lot of other movements, sometimes that's been lost. Certainly in the trade union movement, it's very difficult to find trade union leaders who are actively encouraging agency amongst their members. So that would be my response. It's probably an ongoing battle in every movement, but they're at different stages. And I think in the animal rights movement, it's particularly contested at the moment.
Yeah,
Jane.
I mean, I would add to that by saying, I think, and again, this is something that we touch on quite a lot in the book, it's building that sense of us. You know, who are we as a group, as an organisation, as a social movement? What is that us that binds us together, that makes us want to act together collectively? And I think that's a major failing in lots of groups. People come in as individuals and don't, you know, build that collective sense of us and why we're here, and what we're doing, what we're trying to do as a group of people.
I have a question on that, a multi-pronged question on that, but I'd wonder, do you want me to wait until after your presentation? Or
Maybe that would be a good thing to do, and we could.
Yeah,
I think
so
we'll
you've
do that. Yeah. And
Right.
yeah, John's already stepped on my toes because he's answered a question that I haven't asked yet. So
ahead of the game.
Yeah, I'll come back to it. Don't you worry. Right. Okay. Let's put this up now. Because of the way this is going to work, I think I'll need you to instruct me when to change the slide. Yeah.
Okay, we'll do. Yeah. Okay. So shall I start?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start first, and I'll tell you when to switch slides then. So again, just to say thank you for inviting us. It's a real pleasure to be here. And what we want to do next is to talk about our motivation for writing the book, you know, a little bit how it came about, and then hopefully we'll have some more discussion. So if you just switch the slide. So, you know, again, a bit of a background. We've both got over 40 years experience of being involved in different social movements. Starting off really, I think, mainly in the animal rights movement, but also in the anti-racist movement, anti-fascist activity, and local community initiatives around planning issues, which is often not the most sexy of topics, but it is something that actually does bind people together in localities quite strongly. And both of us have been very active within the trade union movement, holding all sorts of different positions. And I would say that I think, you know, there's lots of differences in each of those different activities and social movement, but there's a common theme as well. And that's all about, you know, what can we do to effect change? People become involved in social movements because they see and they feel injustice, and they want to, you know, make the world a better place. But often we start off, and again, this is something we cover quite a bit in the book, we start off and we're led by our emotions, how we feel about something, whether that be, you know, for me, finding out that animals are suffering either in experiments or in the, you know, in the hunting arena, or in the trade union movement, when a colleague is treated badly by an unfair bullying manager, for example, we feel hurt and then we might feel angry. And that's what motivates us to do something to stop those injustices happening. New slide. So what I'm trying to say here is that we don't start out as natural change makers. We might not have any idea about how to effect change, how to actually go about doing it. We might not know what a theory of change is, and there's no reason why we should do. We might not know about how to develop leaders to make our campaigns more effective. And all of that is normally in all the movements that I think I've been involved in. You know, talking about ourselves, we often jumped into campaigns feet first, very willing and enthusiastic, wanting to change things, but also in retrospect, probably quite naive in lots of ways. And there was a sense that dedication and enthusiasm was all that we needed. And I think it took us both probably quite a long time to realise that we needed a lot more than that. We needed to understand things like strategy. We need to understand our opponents better, and that's often something that's really missing. We need to understand power and how to build it, how to use it strategically, and also to understand different concepts of things like, leadership development, group dynamics, the state, for example. And that's we could talk about that later on, how the state intervenes and tries to stop us, trying to achieve our aims and stopping us becoming effective. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that we learned the hard way that we needed to be much smarter and much more strategic in what we're doing. New slide, and then John's going to take over.
I think you're a slide behind. If we could have one more slide advanced, please.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
so there are 12 chapters in the book, and each chapter draws upon some social movement theory and takes this lens to look at different campaigns that we've been involved in over the years. We look at what worked, but crucially, also what didn't work and why that was. Often this was because we perhaps jumped into campaigns without thinking through how we might achieve our demands, or it's because we hadn't given much thought to the structure of our group, or because the organisations we were involved in had a different view on how to campaign. What we do in the book is to dissect some of those different approaches, to think through how we could do things better. In other cases, we celebrate wins, where we follow through a theory of change to make a difference. But all of this is designed to provoke you, the reader, to explore your own experiences of campaigning. We are not gurus with all the answers, but we are experienced organisers who believe we've learned to ask some challenging questions. If we could have the next slide, please. Next slide, Roger.
Organising from below.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, it's there.
Oh, it's not in where I can see. Oh, here it is. Okay.
Yeah.
At the start of the book, we look at different approaches to organising. That from above and that from below, because how we organise it is important. We believe that radical democracy requires active citizenship. And by that we mean that it's important to place the community at the centre of resolving its own problems. An organising from below approach would start by asking, what are the shared interests of this community? What stories bind them? And where can they find their agency? We think an organiser's primary task at the start of any campaign is to make people believe in themselves. If people feel that nothing can change, no one will ever listen, then it makes no sense to invest time, emotional energy, and at times risk to your livelihood to challenge injustice. A transformational organiser aims to help people to see they do have the agency and that they can create change. So what is key is activating the agency of our existing supporters, but also thinking about how we might involve a far wider group way beyond our existing support. Next slide, please. Okay, an example we draw upon is from a hunt saboteur campaign. We were out in the field one day and we learned from a local woman in a village that she didn't like the hunt and that many of her neighbours in the area were of the same opinion. This came as a surprise to us because when we went out into the hunts area, we always felt vulnerable. She was in short one of us. This led the group to radically rethink what it meant for its campaign. If we could organise the anti-hunt supporters in the countryside, maybe we could change the balance of power in the campaign against blood sports. We decided to test our theory by taking control of their territory. The week before one of the hunts meets, our group leafleted every door in a village of about 500 homes. We asked people to join us in the pub forecourt where the hunt planned to meet. Given past experiences, we were expecting a violent reaction from the hunt supporters. However, when we arrived, there was already a large crowd of local people who were upset with the hunt's presence in their village. To everyone's joy, there was no sign of the hunt. Suddenly, our hunt saboteurs group were in a position where we could mobilise local opposition to cancel a day's hunting. This was always the ultimate prize. No hunting meant no wildlife killed and the hunt being weakened as an institution. Next slide and over to Jane.
Yeah, so in another chapter, we discuss strategy and the developing a theory of change. Basically, this looks at if we're to be effective at changing adverse circumstances and winning a better world, rather than merely protesting injustice. We need to think strategically, and particularly to understand the different forces against us. We need to ask ourselves how we might shift the balance of power in our favour. So if we're thinking about theory of change, we need to ask questions like, what would make this decision maker exercise their choices in a way that was less damaging? How can we establish a plan to marshal our forces, those we have and those that we can build, to destabilise the current equilibrium of power? New slide. So, as another example then, the theory of change we adopted in the anti-Hunt campaign was to organise within their territory, as John has just said, and to change the dominant narrative that was normal or traditional, and to build an active local resistance. It was all about rebalancing power, and it was very effective. Another example we look at is the equal pay campaign in the trade union. So this particular trade union had figured out a way to force the employer to say yes, when really they wanted to say no. They recognised that it was cheaper for the employer to break the law than complying with it. The union decided then that it had to change that dynamic. So there was lots of planning that went ahead and unproductive negotiations with the employer. So then the trade union said, okay then, unless there was an immediate commitment to addressing gender pay inequality, it would be submitting a minimum of 30 equal pay claims per month as part of this sort of ongoing rolling campaign. So you can see we're building, increasing the power that we had and increasing the annoyance for the employer. Initially, the union didn't get a response from senior managers until the third tranche of 30 employment tribunal claims were lodged. So the union's theory of change here then was that once its strategy started to affect the company's finances, and again, you might recognise this within the animal rights movement as well, that the power dynamic really began to shift, and it was likely that the employer then wanted to negotiate. So it took, in this particular case, took 3 months and over 100 employment tribunal claims before the employer collapsed and agreed to renegotiate a pay structure. So that's just an example of a different theory of change. New slide and over to John.
Okay, we can't cover everything in the book in this short presentation, but we just want to make a couple of key points before we finish. The first is equality must be a central organising practice. Our opponents constantly seek to divide us. The most radical thing we can do in response is to actively unite our communities. A second reason is that we all bring our lived experience to any challenge we face, whether that collective or individual. When you're planning a campaign, a diversity of experiences increases the knowledge and experience resource available. We therefore explore different approaches to leadership and leadership development at every level within your campaign structure, because without leadership and a strategic direction for your cause, organising will be unfocused and unproductive. Leadership is about building relationships that enable groups to grow and increase their influence, while drawing upon the diverse lived experience of supporters to find appropriate strategies to win. To conclude, what we've tried to do in this book is not to provide a set of rules or a step-by-step guide, but have sought to review real-life campaign experiences, messy and confused as they often are, to illustrate the complexities and contradictions that are part of a journey of a successful campaign. There aren't fixed rules when it comes to organising, but we can reflect and learn from the many and various approaches to organising, allowing us to consider what would fit best in the specific circumstances of a particular campaign. I think that's the end of the slideshow, Roger.
Very good. Right. Okay. But well, let me see.
Thank you for that.
Yes, indeed. Now, there's a few issues there. I want to go straight back to what Jenny McQueen said, actually. When you were talking about the difference between plant-based and the vegan or the animal rights movement and everything, I've seen this before, this idea that, you know, like splitting things up is not a kind of great thing to do. Although I tend to agree with John that a distinction between those two ideas is really necessary. And especially when you're talking about celebrities who half the time get labeled, or they have the label, you know, vegan successfully attached to them, but they don't claim it themselves. I mean, you know, Ricky Gervais is a classic example. He resisted that label for years and years and years, until the last few months, in fact, you know. But the movement is almost like desperate to co-opt them. But that just creates confusion then. And that goes back to what we were saying before about people coming into the movement unsure of what they've joined and stuff. So I think that kind of building on what you said, John, that it's probably useful to have that distinction.
Yeah, I think so. But I would also say that we have to distinguish between strategy and tactics. 40 years ago, there were very, very few vegans. There were very, very few animal rights activists. And when a celebrity announced that they went vegan, we were all really hard, because we thought that is someone who can convince other people you don't have to be crazy to be a vegan, right? We were in such a minority and so misunderstood that a celebrity being vegan became a talking point, and more people became vegan as a result of it. Nowadays, I think we're in a different place, and you have the real problem that somebody who happens to have a plant-based diet has a whole range of other views, some of which you might agree with and some of which you're not. And you have a danger of the movement being seen through that prism. 40 years ago, the movement wasn't seen through any prism, apart from the campaigning we were doing. So I think in different circumstances, different tactics are more effective. So celebrating a celebrity who turned vegan 40 years ago was valuable. Doing it today is probably not.
Just building on something that this is kind of referring to, like separating things out into maybe certain values or beliefs, ideologies, I don't know, plant-based, veganism, animal rights. Some people do seem to distinguish between animal rights and veganism, and maybe I always see them as kind of two parts of the same tree in a way, in that they're connected but maybe not identical, but I feel like we can't have one without the other. But just in terms of something that you talk about in the book, you were talking about in your leadership, I think in chapter 6, developing leadership, is that you talk about one thing is don't be afraid of compromise. And I just wondered, I've
got a note of that.
Oh, have you? Hey, we're on the same wavelength here, Doc. Do you think, both of you, that advocating for vegan values and only that is similar to your phrase of demanding nothing but complete victory? Because we do have a lot of people in the movement now who will advocate for, say, reducitarianism, or let's have a symbiotic relationship with our fellow animals where we give them care, they give us their eggs, Isn't that how the whole bloody thing started in the first place? But these are kind of things that are going on in the movement at the moment. And those people are saying, in a similar way, this is compromise. This is how we take smaller steps, and we can't just get a vegan world immediately. These are the small steps. Would you agree with that? Or do you think this is good compromise? Or do you think we need to stick with these strong vegan values that the pioneers started way back when?
Jane, do you want to take that, or do you want me to jump in?
You go ahead first. I've got some thoughts on it, but you go ahead first.
See, I think there's a difference between compromising on your values and compromising in a power struggle, right? So I'll give you a typical example. A trade union calls some strike action. They want a 10% pay rise. Their members, I mean, look at the BMA, right? They wanted 42%. Their members were entitled to 42%, by the way. It only took them back to where they were 14 years ago. Now, they're entitled to it. Justice demands it. But the power that union had could not deliver it, not in one go anyway, right? So at some stage, you have to say, given the power we have and the amount that we can force this decision maker into a corner, at some stage, you have to make a decision. Should we take what's on the table now, rebuild our strength and come back for more? Or is it all or nothing? So I think that trade union example illustrates it quite well. I don't understand how people can be vegan advocates saying you don't need to be vegan. I remember when I went vegetarian, I went vegetarian first, and only a couple of months later went vegan. And I remember at the end of the first week of being a vegetarian, I think, well, that's odd. I haven't missed meat at all. It's not like giving up smoking or something. You know, it's not. Animal produce is not addictive. It's simple choice. I'm not going to do that anymore. So I think when we talk about compromise in terms of when you're in a battle with an opponent, recognizing if you cannot win anymore, take what you can at the moment, so long as what you're not doing is selling out your values. I mean, one of the things they do in the States quite terribly is when a trade union enters into a debate, they will sign up to a no strike agreement forever, right? That's selling your principles down the line. So I think distinguishing between recognizing what you can achieve today with the power you have and the need to build more power to achieve more is being strategic. That's different from selling your principles, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. But I think, again, just taking an example of the trade union movement, the trade union movement's a broad church. You know, people join a trade union because they want representation if they've got a problem at work. But there are people in the trade union movement with incredibly diverse views, you know, on the left and on the far right in some cases. For me, it's about what can we do as an organisation to bring people where we want them to be. And so one of the things that we've done over the last 5 years or so, we set up an organisation called the Ella Baker School of Organising, because we think political education is really important in building and transforming social movements. So the more you can get people involved in, I mean, I say political education, I mean it with a small p, not a party political. You start to transform people's views by giving them the information they need to do what John's just said in terms of move forward for progressive change. So I think there's lots of things that are combined, that are important in social movements that help us, you know, move things forward in that way.
So if one of the, just to give a specific example, because sometimes I sometimes find it easier to understand things in real terms, because I know it's easy to talk theory and we can all kind of agree on all of that, and what you're saying is really, really useful and seems very very powerful. In terms of a specific example, for example, some people in the movement would say, right, if you go out for something to eat, if you go to a friend's house, something to eat, and they are going to make you food, and that food is not animal free, basically, but in order not to seem like an extreme person with your vegan values, you shouldn't make a fuss about that and just go ahead and maybe consume that and just say, you know, you're veganish, and actually that's fine. And if they're going to do the same, you can say the same. You know, if they're trying to make moves towards moving to animal-free food, you can actually excuse that in them as well and say, well, actually, no, it's fine, because actually you're going in the right direction. Is that, do you think, compromising values, or is that taking what you can?
I don't think that's an issue for compromise at all. You know, as a vegan with over 40 years, I would never, and actually I've never really encountered any friends or colleagues or people I've been out for dinner with ever saying anything like that to me. I think sometimes we set up straw men and women, you know, in campaign, in debates within organisations. I think it goes back to what John was saying about, you know, there's a difference between, you know, an ethical principle and, you know, a choice, for example, or a compromise. And I think the things are very different there. It's something that I would never compromise on, and I've never really been asked to do that. You know, and Deb, you know, says something here about bigger cages instead of abolition. Is a compromise too far? Absolutely, it's something I agree with, but it doesn't mean that, as John said, that you don't you oppose improvements along the way, even if they're not the ones that you want. So you wouldn't necessarily campaign, you know, you wouldn't say, well, I don't want that to happen. You know, you know, it's about, like John said, it's what power we have at a particular time in order to be able to get what we want and we're campaigning for, and certain steps. But that's not, I'm not advocating a stagist approach in that. It's just accepting at certain times in certain campaigns, you don't always win, you know.
Can I just pick up on this? Because I think, you know, I'll be honest with you. If someone invited me around their house and said, "Oh, I've made some meat for you," they wouldn't be my friend. I wouldn't be staying. It's not, you know, the idea that your friend would invite you around and say, "Well, go on, have a little bit of mince. It'll do you good." It makes no sense to me. But I do think, because it caused ruffled a few feathers earlier, if you excuse the pun, the example of chicken's lib is quite interesting. So this is about 40 years ago. You could not buy free-range eggs in any supermarket in the country. This tiny organisation made up of 2 women who had done enormous amount of work exposing battery farms and in particular broiler units. They had this campaign where they said, you know, chickens that are kept in these big broiler units, factory farms, they end up with what's known as hock burns, acid burns on their bum because they're sitting in their own effluents. And it was actually made the food unfit for human consumption, but nobody knew this. And they got us all out all over the country, going into the supermarket, searching through the chicken things, pulling them out, demanding to see the manager, saying, "Look, this shouldn't be on sale, it's unfit." And you know, exposing it in the local press. I think that did a lot of good for vegan awareness and so on. The other thing they did, and I supported them, I got involved in this campaign, they said, look, if we can get Marks and Spencer's to sell free-range eggs, every other supermarket in the country will have to start selling them. And if people start having the access to them, then the battery cage will be dead. That was their view. We ended up doing lots of, it's in the book, we did lots of stuff, dressing up as chickens and clucking in shops and handing out leaflets against them. We were handing out leaflets against factory farms.
One of your favourite things, John, dressing up as a chicken, I remember.
I've still got the photograph. I wish I had it to show you.
Oh, Jane, that would be great.
You see, I don't think there was anything mistaken in actually a strategic choice that says we can actually weaken the factory farming industry if we can give people a choice. Now, of course, it's not pure veganism, but you weren't asking me to eat the battery egg and the free-range egg, and I wouldn't have done so. But actually recognizing that there was a sort of balance of forces going on where we were very weak, but where actually a lot of people were interested in avoiding battery eggs. I think that was a choice that was worth making. I mean, other people can disagree, and that's fine. But at the time, I think it made a significant difference and contributed to quite a lot of growth in interest in what factory farming was and how it could be avoided.
It's an ongoing kind of divisive thing in the movement, isn't it? Do we advocate for welfare reforms whilst we're actually abolitionist in our goals? It's an ongoing kind of debate, and does cause a lot of division, isn't it? I suppose. I wonder if I could. You might have other things to add on that, which is great. I just wanted to come back to Deb's question as well, which I think is really interesting. And I had similar thoughts when I was reading your book.
I was just about to do that as well. So
we're like living parallel lives tonight, Doc, aren't we? We're in the same little.
This is really interesting in terms of the book, because I think a lot of animal advocates will be thinking this question. Well, I understand that this book is about social movement, mobilization, organizations in the round. Does this factor make a big difference in terms of how you can extrapolate? I think that's a really interesting question.
Yeah. I was definitely thinking all the way through, thinking, I wonder how that relates into the individuals not mobilizing their own and organizing their own movement.
I mean, it clearly makes a difference. But I think those questions about strategic choice and power balance and how you draw more people into the movement so as to build more power are the same across all movements. I think, I mean, you know, there is to be an animal rebellion by the animals very often. And so it is us organising in solidarity. And so that is a big difference. But in terms of the strategic choice and how we get to win, I'm not convinced it makes a huge difference. Jane, what's your thought?
Much the same, to be honest, yeah. I mean, I think there's a danger of falling into a discussion around all or nothing. And just trying to think about as being agents of change and thinking about the power dynamics around us at any particular time. And it's not that we accept where we've got in the fight for whether that be animal rights, human rights, you know, the anti-nuclear movement, the anti-racist movement. You know, in a sense, sometimes all we can do is what we can do at any particular point in time. And that doesn't mean, like I said, getting rid of your principles or bending on your principles. It's about what can be achieved at this particular time and what difference does that make in terms of encouraging other people to be involved in your movement. I think if we start out as any movement where we say you have to do X, Y, and Z, or you have to be, you know, you have to be vegan and you have to agree with everything we say, then I don't think we would be where we are in terms of the growth in veganism, the increased plant-based diets that people are adopting. I think change comes about much more slowly than we'd actually like, but it's not about, I don't think, getting rid of your principles to accept sometimes that actually there's only so much that we can do at that particular time. It's about building for the next stage of action.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So just another way of looking at that question is ask yourself, well, why haven't we won already? Right? It's a really good starting point of any discussion. Why does this problem still exist? Why hasn't it been solved years ago? And that, I think, leads you to think about the forces that are supporting the problem to continue, benefiting financially and other ways from the existence of the problem and so on. And I think without strategic choice and deciding where are the weak spots in those opposed to us, then we're really just banging our heads against a brick wall very often.
Yeah, we do that quite a lot. So
Does
Nella,
feel like
welcome back. Have you got a question or a contribution?
Yes, I have. I don't know if you already have covered this, but my question is, I understand that we should, provide any kind of relief to the individuals that are oppressed right now. And of course, I'm not against any kind of measure can provide this relief, although this is not, the welfarist reform is not our end game. But my question is, what steps should we, what measures should we take in order for the non-vegans that make the decision to buy free range, for example, not to think that this is all we ask from them, that they change from the regular eggs to the free range ones, and that's fine, and they can happily continue to consume eggs, for example. And that's for any other kind of I would say welfarist reform that may have some use and that may provide some relief to some individuals. That's one part of my question. And the other one is how we frame this, how we frame our our demands, our asks from the general audience. So we urge them towards change without letting them feel that they have done all they can. I don't know if it makes any sense, what I'm asking.
I think it's interesting. I mean, one of the things we explore in the book is how we build people power. And there's lots and lots of different ways you can think about power. But one way of thinking about power is power within, power with, and power over. So power within is about saying to people, you can make a change. You don't have to participate in this animal abuse by using these products or eating these foods. You have it within you to make that change. And frankly, a lot of people find that surprising. So many people feel that they just go along doing what they have been brought up to do, rather than actually challenging the norms and thinking about where they think that they should fit in that equation. So power within is very important. Power with is when you work with other people to try and make an oasis of change. For example, you could create an animal sanctuary, right? And you've not defeated the power structure, but you've created an oasis where actually there's some peace. And then the final form of power is power over. And power over is when you say to McDonald's, you will not have a store in our town, or whoever, when you force a decision maker to do what you want rather than they want. Now, that's the hard bit. And that's where I think there will be times when it is absolutely correct to make compromises. Because if you haven't got the power to win everything, if you can win something, as so long as your people understand, the only reason we didn't get more is because we hadn't built enough power. Let's get back and build some more power. Then I think it's a step in the right direction. The moment people start thinking, well, you just didn't try hard enough, you don't care enough, then it becomes demoralizing. So I think thinking about sort of compromising the power within, what should I do in my life? I think that's an area where you really don't want to encourage compromise. No, you're perfectly capable of being a vegan, adopting this lifestyle and so on. Power with is, why don't you make your contribution? You can make your contribution, and together we can achieve something. And the power over is the tough one.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes, I don't know if you get this objection often enough, but I get it all the time. People that they completely understand what I'm talking about. They agree that this is the right thing to do. They also agree that this is feasible to do. But they say that I'm going to change when everybody changes. If eggs are off the supermarket shelves tomorrow, fine by me. I won't consume any eggs, but I won't do it now when everyone else is consuming. What do you think about this?
Okay, so
stance.
I think we always have to start where people are. In any conversation, we have to listen to them. We have to hear what they have to say, understand how they feel about the issue, and then try and engage with them about how that they move forward. We do a lot about tactics for transformative conversations. But Ronnie used to say this thing. I hope you don't mind me repeating. It's people say, "Oh, I agree with you, but I like eating meat." He said, "Yeah, well, I imagine Gary Glitter liked what he was doing. It doesn't make it right, though." And that sense of, actually saying, "Are you sure that just because you like something, that makes it an ethical choice?" And most people recognise it that there isn't a correlation between those two things.
Well,
just to say, I had to cut a lot of that kind of speak from Ronnie out of the podcast that I did with him. It ended up being 2 episodes, and there was a lot on the cutting room floor, let's say, about certain individuals that, little phrases that Ronnie had up his sleeve was quite funny. But yeah, I didn't put them out.
we didn't think we'd go into Paul Garrett territory, but it's coming up to the hour, so I've got loads to ask, but
I've literally only got one of my 4 questions so far.
Are we okay to continue, or should we? What's the score with you, Wendy, in terms of your medication and all that? Not your medication.
Brian's medication. I could do another 10 minutes if Brian doesn't mind.
Okay. Have you got a follow-up, Nella, or should we go to Wendy?
No. Let's go to Wendy's question.
Oh, which one to choose? Oh, so many. Oh, that's Brian's alarm. Apologies. So, which one's going to be? Right, I'll start with this one. I'm going to start with this one, actually. Where do you think the boundaries are? Because you talk a lot in the book about inclusivity, and especially building the story of us and building communities around narratives and stories, shared stories and rewriting people who are invisible in these stories back into stories and that kind of thing. There's a lot of talk about inclusivity, a lot of coalition, a lot of solidarity between groups, as we maybe mentioned before. But I just wondered maybe what you might think of where the boundaries are between inclusivity of the largest possible range of identities, in terms of gender, race, ability, socio-economic standing, experiences generally, and then also where those lines might be in like who we ally ourselves with. Because you gave the examples in the book about the miners in the UK and the miners supporting predominantly Asian women at the 1976 Grunwick dispute, and then also a mutual support between lesbians and gays support the miners, and then miners supporting LGBTQ plus rights through the labour movement. But also you made the point that some of those miners at the same time as promoting those rights would have also been telling racist, sexist, homophobic jokes and having those, you know, those kind of ideologies and the norms in their communities and things like that. And sometimes in the vegan movement, I feel like there's a real almost clash between people who do want to have coalitions and pro-intersectional and solidarity between groups, and then others who don't. But also there are a lot of more right-wing people who identify as more right-wing and vegans for Trump, etc., Trump supporting vegans kind of thing. And I just wonder what you think about the lines of boundaries of who we work with and who we wouldn't ally ourselves with.
I mean, I think our general starting point is that we need to have a dialogue with as many people as possible. If we are to build the strongest, most powerful movement for change, then we have to speak to those people who disagree with us, because otherwise we're always going to be in a minority. And that can be really difficult and challenging. And I don't underestimate how difficult it is to sit down with people who fundamentally disagree with you on a wide range of issues. But we have to do that. We have to open up conversations, because that's the way we change people's minds. If we can't do that, then we're never really going to move forward.
I'm sort of, you know, just in response, I'll say something first, then I'll come back to the question. But years and years ago, when we worked at Animal Aid, we were approached by a guy called Nitin from the Young Indian Vegetarians. And he said, I want to organise a picnic in Alexandra Palace Park. Will you help? And we said, yeah, why not? You know, and people at Animal Aid going, well, why on earth are you getting involved in that for? That's not, you know, that's not campaigning. And at the time, you could have gone to any Animal Aid group in the country, any Animal Aid meeting, any Animal Aid protest, and you would hardly see a non-white face on it. So we went along and we ended up in these planning groups, and we were going around Indian temples and gurdwaras and things like that. And it was just really enriching for us to learn so much of their philosophy about the rights of animals. And it actually became a bridge between those Indian philosophies of animal rights and the animal rights movement. So I think every movement in the UK has got to proactively reach out and become more inclusive, and to use Roger's term, recognise the intersectionality of these issues. In terms of where you draw a line, see, there's a difference between coalitions with institutions that hold certain views and working with someone who still has some of the baggage that they've grown up with. Because we all are socialised. I mean, I spent 18 years eating meat, never thought twice about it. Never crossed my mind that there was any cruelty involved. And the first time I had a discussion with someone, I remember very clearly saying, well, you have to eat meat, don't you? Where would you get your protein from? All the nonsense that all of us endure when we talk to people about eating meat, that all came out of me. And yet someone had the time and had the patience to actually speak to me, to listen to me, and to answer me. And that was transformative. And I think the experience of the miners who went to Grunwick and the miners who were involved in the lesbian and gay support of mining was transformative. They came from communities that had very rigid gender stereotypes. They came to understand that they weren't set in concrete and that there are different ways of living, and they came to celebrate that. But it wouldn't have happened if people hadn't reached out to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think then, with that in mind, that it's again, going back to what we spoke about earlier in the show, that it's the fact that we're not face to face, we're not seeing the whites of people's eyes and being connected in that way. Like, we might be very geographically distant and we're relying on online spaces and social media within the movement, and that this allows this more disconnection and this otherization of other advocates in the movement. And if that is true, how do you think within this modern tech world that we can build those bridges within the movement, and if we even should, and how do we do that across these lines with the situations that we have here, online, social media, etc.? How can we build those communities and create the story of us a little bit more?
I mean, I think it is much more difficult online than it is face to face. Our body language is very different when we're face to face with someone. And I just remember when I was doing some research as part of my job on trade unions. I remember talking to a union negotiator, and I'm a union negotiator myself, and spend a lot of time talking to people in HR and managers within my own organisation. And one of the things you have to do is you have to build relationships with people on the other side if you are to achieve what you want to achieve. And one of the things that the guy spoke to me about, the negotiator, he said, when I go into meetings with people in this employer, that employer, I always make a point about having a conversation so they know that I'm not just the union negotiator. I'm a human being with a family, with children. And what we do is I always go in, shake the person's hand, ask them how they're doing, and then there's some talk about what I've done over the weekend. How's your family? Oh, I've got kids too. You start to build a rapport with someone, and they treat you differently. If people don't know anything about you, and you're just a blank, you're just a face on a screen like this now. They know nothing about you. You don't build rapport. You don't treat them as a fellow human being, and therefore it's really difficult to actually achieve a goal when that person doesn't matter to you, and they don't have any respect for you, and you don't have any respect for them. If we can break that down, where even if we disagree with each other, we respect each other, then actually it makes it much more easy to move forward. So it's something we always have to do in negotiations. You can think about what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. At some point, those senior leaders within those organisations are going to have to come together face to face and have a conversation, because that's the only way that is going to be resolved in the end.
I just want to come back to Wendy's question there about how do you do it. We're running a series of in-person sessions around the country, and the first half hour is just nibbles and conversation. So, for example, on Thursday we're in Nottingham, and we're going to have a panel, people from Veggies, the animal rights group, some trade unionists, some XR, race equality people, the panel discussing the book. And people coming from all those movements to this launch. And the first 30 minutes is just tea and biscuits. Because actually people come, if you're an ordinary meeting, people come in, they sit down, they don't know anyone when they arrive, they don't know anyone when they leave. It's not human. Actually, creating opportunities for human interaction is one of the most radical things that we can do, particularly getting people from different sections of our movements actually just chatting together and coming to see each other as part of the same cause, really.
Yeah,
Great points. Thank you.
I can understand that. And so let me just ask one of the millions of questions that I wanted to. I'm glad you clarified that as well, John, because I thought you said for the first half an hour you went around nibbling people, but there you go. So we'll have to have you back if you're not too rich and famous. We'll have to have you back once in a few months' time, because I wanted to go into Alinsky and all the stuff that you talked about, that shift that had happened in your analysis, all that kind of stuff, And I particularly like this thing about we are the ones we've been waiting for, and I was going to ask about influencers. Are they disempowering for a movement, or are they empowering? I think John has kind of answered that really. So I'm going to restrict it to right at the end of the book. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were kind of struggling, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, to be that positive about the things that are going on. And the things that you said had got worse from the 70s. You said, you know, teenagers of the 70s, you thought that the arc of change was on the way to justice and all that, and then, you know, kind of reality hit kind of thing. So that reminded me of Donald Watson's idea of the fact that veganism is part and parcel of the moral evolution of humanity. But he said we've got to make sure that we realize that evolution can be regressive or progressive, right? And I think that's what you were saying there, that you've got to be vigilant, you've also got to be flexible, you've got to move with the times, right?
I'd say two things. I think that the working class movement internationally has been in retreat for 40 years. There's an academic who did some research. He's been promising to update the figures for me, but the latest figures he gave me, which are a little bit out of date, said that if the share of the economy that went to wages was the same today as it was in 79, then the average worker would be £10,000 a year better off. Where has that £10,000 gone? It's gone off to, you know, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and various other people. The economy has grown massively. We should all be working a 4-day week, having lots of luxury. There should not be a single child living in poverty in this country. In fact, there's 4.5 million. And that's because money has, you know, wealth has been taken out of our communities and given to people who are already rich. That's bad enough. But you now see there's an international movement of the hard right. Trump, we've got Farage here, we've got Musk, we've got far right groups are in power in 7 European countries at the moment. And I suspect that if we don't get ourselves organised, we will see Farage and Reform UK and Badenoch coalition in government in this country in five years' time. That's a very real threat. It's not a nightmare, it's a very real and imminent threat. And so I think that whole idea that social justice is something we can push it a little bit further forward, but it's going to go in that direction anyway, is a myth. We've seen it before. I mean, look at what happened in Germany in the 30s. Like, the horrors that happened then could happen again. And it's our responsibility to make sure they don't. And we won't succeed if we take our eyes off the ball.
Yeah, I think, well, do you want to add to that, Jane?
No, because I don't want to take us even further down.
I'm not pessimistic, by the way. I think
no,
the power
fair
to
enough.
change this.
In terms of the
they
state of the
do
world,
use it.
though, yeah.
I got the impression that you were struggling to, I mean, I know you wanted to kind of end with a very optimistic message, but I think that there was a real balance going on and a struggle there. That's what I meant, really. But
yeah, I mean, I think there's some dark times ahead that we're facing. But I think, you know, I still remain optimistic. Otherwise, I wouldn't be campaigning. I wouldn't be still active within social movements. I still think there's real possibilities for change if we come together, if we have dialogue, if we talk, if we're compassionate, if we're caring about each other. Then, you know, there is huge opportunities, but there's a lot of work to be done. It's
the only way to be, really, isn't it? I mean, let's face it. You know,
Yeah.
So pessimistic or what? So
I tried being depressed. I found it didn't help.
It doesn't. It's like they say, action is the remedy for despair, isn't it? Something like that. So it's absolutely true. Just on a more positive note, though, Jenny says, superb advice. Even at our AR meetings, we never really given enough time for chit chat. I think we're going to fix that. Get the biscuits out, Jenny. I'd say. Always making me feel hungry.
Get the nibbles out. So
nibbles out.
Anybody got a last word before we say goodbye?
So could we? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Anna.
I just wanted to say, because we all have so many more questions. Could we perhaps think of a part 2?
We love doing part 2s on this show, don't we?
We love part 2s, yeah. It's because we're all gobshites.
But I also just wanted to ask Jane and John to remind people who might not have been here at the beginning where they can find your book, please.
So if you Google it, Changemakers, Radical Strategies for Social Movement Organising, you can find it directly from the publisher, which is Bristol University Press. Much better to buy there from Amazon or any other independent bookseller.
And the book is called Changemakers, Radical Strategies for Social Movement Organising. Ah, there we go. Thank you, Jane.
That's what it looks like.
That's what it looks like, yeah. Horrible cover, by the way, but yeah.
If people want to visit the Ella Baker School of Organising website, there's a link there which links to the Changemakers tour that we're running over the next few months. So there's some in-person versions of this.
Well, thank you everybody for all your questions. It was really lovely.
Are we
We've got a whole of 100,000 more actually, Jane, between us, I think. More questions. It was such a good chat. Thank you, and the comments were so good. Some really great chats going on. Great questions.
Great comments. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you everyone in the chat as well. Really appreciate that you being here till the end.
Right, people. Thanks ever so much for sticking with us, as you always do. You did a great job as usual, and we shall see you. I think we've got about 2 or 3 shows lined up, even, which is unusual for us because we've, we kind of flagged a little bit recently, but we've got a new resolution for 25. So, so thanks for making the first one of 25 really good. Thanks very much, obviously, to Jane and John, and we shall see you again next time, folks. Thanks very much.